The first time I heard the thing, I honestly thought somebody was landing a damn helicopter behind my house. Low, constant, vibrating through the kitchen glass like a bad migraine you could actually hear, and when I stepped into the backyard, coffee still in my hand, there it was, bolted into the side wall of my townhouse like it belonged there. Big gray pool equipment humming against my property, pipes running under the fence line, water rattling through the system like veins under skin. And the craziest part wasn't even the machine itself. It was the fact my neighbor looked me dead in the eye and said, "Relax, man, it's just a pump." Like somehow that explained why his entire pool system was hanging off my wall. I live in a little townhouse row outside Wilmington, North Carolina. One of those late 80s developments where every unit looks almost identical until you've lived there long enough to notice the differences. Mine sat at the very end of the row, which I always liked because I only shared one wall instead of two. Less noise, less drama. At least that used to be true. The place wasn't fancy, but it was mine. My dad helped me fix it up after my divorce about 8 years ago, back before the cancer took him. We spent one whole summer laying clay tile across the back patio, sweating through our shirts, arguing about baseball and old trucks while a radio played somewhere inside. Every crack in that patio had a memory attached to it. I know that sounds sentimental as hell, but when you lose people, objects stop being objects. They turn into evidence somebody loved you once. So I kept the place quiet. Simple. Predictable. Then Trevor and Elise moved in next door. They bought the unit in early April, and from the moment the moving truck showed up, it felt like a reality show had parked beside me. Contractors in and out every day, loud music, giant samples of stone leaning against fences, delivery trucks blocking the narrow drive. Trevor was one of those guys who treated confidence like a personality trait. Mid-40s maybe, gym tan, expensive sunglasses, always talking half a notch louder than necessary, so everybody around him had to hear how successful he was. First conversation we ever had, I was trimming back the hedges near the fence line when he leaned over and said, "Hey neighbor, hope you don't mind progress." I remember laughing a little because I thought he was joking. I said, "Long as the progress stays on your side." He grinned at me real slow and pointed between our units. Property lines are mostly psychological around here. Now, normal people hear a sentence like that and think it's weird. But when somebody says it smiling, that's when your instincts start whispering. A couple weeks later, I had to leave town for work. I manage commercial flooring projects, mostly schools and office buildings, and one of our sites in Charlotte had a delay issue, so I was gone 3 days. The whole drive back home Sunday night, I kept thinking about how quiet the house would feel after the hotel noise and traffic. Then I opened my back door. Bim. The sound hit me in the chest before I even understood what I was looking at. There was this massive fiberglass housing unit mounted directly onto the shared wall behind my patio table, vibrating hard enough to rattle the silverware drawer inside my kitchen. Thick blue PVC pipes disappeared underground toward Trevor's yard where, apparently, they'd installed a brand new in-ground pool while I was away. I just stood there for maybe 10 seconds trying to process how somebody could possibly think this was acceptable. Then Trevor stepped out onto his deck, holding a beer like we were about to discuss football scores. "You're back," he yelled over the noise. I pointed at the machine. "What the hell is this?" He actually looked confused why I was upset. "Pool pump." "No, I can see that. Why is it attached to my wall?" He shrugged. "Your side's reinforced concrete. Installer said it'd hold vibration better." I stared at him for a second because I honestly thought maybe I'd misunderstood human behavior up until that moment. You drilled into my property without asking me. And this guy, this unbelievable man, takes a sip of beer and says, "Come on, Nate, don't be territorial." We both got a look at the wall. I wish I could tell you I exploded right there, but I didn't. Honestly, that's probably why things ended the way they did. Because my dad used to tell me something whenever somebody arrogant got under his skin. He'd say, "Never interrupt somebody while they're building the rope they'll eventually hang themselves with." So instead of yelling, I just nodded slowly. Then I took out my phone and started taking pictures of everything. Trevor's smile started fading somewhere around photo number 6. Funny how people suddenly recognize boundaries the moment documentation shows up. He lowered the beer and said, "Seriously? You're taking pictures?" I remember answering him without even looking up from my phone. "You mounted industrial equipment onto a shared structure connected to my electrical conduit." "Yeah, I'm taking pictures." He laughed after that, but it wasn't the same laugh anymore. There was tension in it now, the kind people use when they're trying to convince themselves they're still in control. Dude, you're making this into a thing. That line stuck with me because people like Trevor always say that after they create the thing. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the noise, although God knows that thing sounded like a diesel engine trying to breathe underwater, but because every vibration coming through the wall felt personal somehow. Like somebody had walked into my house and moved the furniture without permission. I'd sit there on the couch hearing the low mechanical hum through the drywall and think about my father laying tile out back with his knees wrapped in old towels because he refused to buy proper pads. Think about all the years I spent rebuilding my life in that little townhouse after my marriage collapsed. And now some guy with a contractor complex decides my home is basically spare infrastructure for his backyard resort. Around 1 in the morning, I pulled out the original property file from the hallway cabinet. Every homeowner keeps that stuff somewhere, but most never open it. Mine still had handwritten notes from my dad in the margins. Fence measurements, drainage reminders, tiny things. I found the shared wall agreement around 2:30. Then I found the municipal mechanical code. Then the residential noise ordinance. By sunrise, I had highlighted half the damn county records website. The next morning, I called somebody named Leonard Griggs, a structural engineer I'd worked with on a commercial project years earlier. Leonard was probably 70, permanently annoyed, and talked like every sentence had disappointed him personally. But he was good. He came out Wednesday afternoon wearing dusty boots and carrying this black equipment case that looked like something federal agents would transport plutonium in. Trevor happened to be outside when Leonard arrived. "Oh, good." Trevor called over the fence. "You hired Batman." Leonard didn't even look at him. He spent maybe 20 minutes examining the mounting brackets, measuring vibration levels, checking the conduit placement along the wall. Then he crouched near the base of the unit and frowned. "That's interesting." "What?" I asked. He tapped the PVC line with a pen. "Installer crossed parcel line underground too." Now even I blinked at that. Leonard stood up slowly and said, "Whoever installed this either ignored code completely or assumed you wouldn't fight it." Trevor overheard enough of that conversation to wander over. "Look," he said, putting his hands up, "if this is about permits, my pool contractor handled all that." Leonard finally looked at him. "Did your contractor also tell you attaching mechanical equipment to a non-owner structural wall is illegal?" Trevor's jaw tightened just slightly. "Illegal seems dramatic." Leonard shrugged. "So does small claims court until you're in it." I swear I almost smiled. Trevor looked at me then, expecting backup maybe, some neighborly compromise. But I just stood there listening. Because here's the thing people don't understand about conflict. Once somebody decides your comfort matters less than theirs, the argument stops being about the original problem. It becomes about whether they believe consequences apply to them. And Trevor absolutely did not. 2 days later, his attorney emailed me. Not even kidding. A real attorney. The message was written in that polished, fake-friendly corporate tone lawyers use when they want to sound reasonable while insulting you professionally. They offered me a $300 gift card to a local steakhouse in consideration of temporary inconvenience if I agreed to sign a liability waiver regarding the shared wall installation. $300. To permanently accept liability for damage caused by equipment they illegally installed. I laughed so hard I actually scared my dog. Then I got angry. Not explosive angry. Worse, calm angry. The kind where your brain gets very, very organized. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I drove down to city, permitting myself. Small office, beige walls, smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. The clerk at the desk was a woman named Denise who looked exhausted in a way only government employees and ICU nurses understand. I handed her the property survey, Leonard's preliminary report, and photographs of the installation. She studied them quietly for maybe 30 seconds. Then she said, "Oh wow, they attached it there?" Apparently, even she thought it was insane. She checked permit records and frowned harder with every click. No mechanical variance filed. No shared structure authorization. And she paused, squinting at the screen. Their contractor submitted the equipment placement as rear yard freestanding. I said, "It's literally bolted to my wall." "Yeah," she muttered. "That's going to be a problem." That Friday evening, Trevor knocked on my front door. Not aggressively. Honestly, he looked tired. When I opened the door, he sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Hey, can we just talk like normal people?" I almost respected him for trying. Almost. We stood on the porch while cicadas screamed in the trees, and somewhere down the street a kid bounced a basketball over and over against concrete. Trevor said, "Look, Elise thinks this whole thing's gotten out of hand." I stayed quiet. He continued, "The contractor said the wall was shared. We thought shared meant usable. You thought shared meant yours." His expression hardened a little. "Man, why are you being so rigid about this?" That word, rigid, like respecting property lines, was somehow a personality flaw. I looked at him and realized something weird. Trevor genuinely saw himself as the reasonable one. In his mind, I was the difficult neighbor because I refused to absorb the consequences of his decisions quietly. So I asked him something simple. "If I mounted an air compressor outside your bedroom wall without asking, would you be okay with it?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then changed subjects immediately, which told me everything. "You know inspectors are going to drag this out for months, right?" I nodded slowly. "Maybe. And if they make me move the system, it'll cost a fortune." Again, notice the language. Not, "I shouldn't have done it." Not, "Sorry." Just calculations. Cost. Convenience. His inconvenience had become the center of the moral universe. Finally, I said, "Trevor, you didn't ask because you already knew I'd say no." That one landed. You could actually see it hit him. For a second, neither of us spoke. Wind moved through the trees overhead, and the pump behind the wall kept droning like some giant mechanical mosquito. Then Trevor looked me dead in the eye and said quietly, "You know what your problem is? You care more about being right than being neighbors." And I answered, "No, I just think being neighbors requires respect." He stared at me another second, then walked away without saying goodnight. 3 days later, the city inspector showed up at my house carrying a clipboard and a decibel meter. And that's when Trevor's situation went from inconvenient to catastrophic. The inspector's name was Raul Mendoza, former military from the look of him, straight posture, clipped voice, mirrored sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. He introduced himself, shook my hand once, then walked straight into the backyard without wasting a single second on small talk. Trevor came outside almost immediately. Of course he did. People like Trevor can sense authority the same way dogs hear thunderstorms before humans do. "What's this about?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but I could already hear the strain underneath it. Raul glanced at the pump humming against the wall and said, "Complaint investigation regarding unauthorized mechanical installation." Trevor forced a laugh. "Wow, sounds serious when you say it like that." Raul didn't laugh back. That was the moment the energy shifted completely. Because up until then, Trevor still thought this was a disagreement between neighbors. Something social. Something negotiable. But city code doesn't care who's charismatic at the barbecue. Raul spent maybe 10 minutes measuring sound levels and inspecting the mounting hardware, while Trevor followed him around, trying to narrate the situation like a tour guide desperately steering the story. The installer said these walls are communal structures. Raul wrote something down. "The vibration's temporary until the system settles." More notes. At worst, maybe paperwork got mixed up. Then Raul crouched beside the mounting plate, checked the parcel map on his tablet, and finally looked up. "This equipment is installed on the wrong property structure, exceeds residential noise limits by 11 decibels, and appears to violate shared wall restrictions under municipal code." Trevor blinked. "Okay, but..." Raul cut him off immediately. "No, not okay, but. This is a violation. Man, I gotta tell you, there's something strangely satisfying about hearing an official say out loud the exact thing you've been trying to explain for weeks." Trevor's whole posture changed after that. Shoulders tight, jaw flexing. You could practically watch his ego trying to renegotiate reality in real time. "So what now?" he asked. Raul handed him a printed notice. "You have 10 business days to remove and relocate the equipment, or the city proceeds with citation and enforcement." Trevor stared at the paper. "Do you have any idea what that costs?" And Raul, God bless this man, just shrugged. "Probably less than litigation." I almost choked trying not to smile. After the inspector left, Trevor turned toward me, standing near the patio door. "You happy now?" I remember thinking how strange that question was. Like justice was some emotional indulgence instead of the predictable outcome of his own choices. "No," I said honestly. "I would have been happy if you'd respected the property line in the first place." He shook his head slowly. "This is exactly why people hate living in HOA neighborhoods." I actually laughed at that. "Trevor, The HOA didn't bolt a jet engine to my wall. For the first time since he moved in, he genuinely looked embarrassed. Not humbled, not sorry, just embarrassed he lost. The next 10 days were unbelievably awkward. Contractors came and went measuring things in his backyard, while Trevor argued loudly on speakerphone almost every afternoon. Through the fence, I caught pieces of conversations about permit liability, contractor negligence, relocation estimates. At one point I heard him yell, "How was I supposed to know shared wall didn't mean shared access?" Even his pool contractor apparently threw him under the bus. Elise, meanwhile, stopped making eye contact entirely. One evening, she quietly apologized while grabbing mail near the curb. "I told him he should have asked you first," she said softly. And honestly, I believed her. Because unlike Trevor, she looked exhausted, not angry. That's the thing about entitlement. It rarely humiliates only the entitled person. Usually everybody around them pays part of the bill too. On the 10th morning, I woke up to the sound of tools clanking outside. No vibration, no droning hum, just silence. I pulled open the blinds and saw a white service truck parked beside Trevor's unit. Two technicians were disconnecting the system while another chipped away old sealant from my wall. And I'm not proud of this part, but I made coffee specifically so I could watch. There's a certain peace that comes from witnessing consequences arrive exactly on schedule. Trevor stood on his deck the whole time with his arms crossed tight against his chest, talking angrily into his phone while the workers removed every bracket one by one. Without the machine attached, the wall looked strangely wounded. Pale outlines where the housing had sat baking in the sun, fresh holes exposed like scars. Around noon, Raul returned for final inspection. He checked the repair work, tested the wall, signed a few forms, then turned toward Trevor, who had apparently decided this was the moment to threaten legal action. "I'm telling you right now," Trevor snapped. "This entire process was excessive." Raul calmly slid the clipboard under one arm. "Sir, you installed non-permitted equipment onto another homeowner's structure." Trevor started talking again, but Raul cut straight through him. "You are currently in full violation. My advice." He paused. "Silence would serve you better." Dead quiet after that. Even the workers stopped moving for a second. Trevor's face turned this deep shade of red I'd only previously seen on overcooked lobster. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. Like he was finally realizing I wasn't the obstacle in his story. I was the consequence. By sunset the truck was gone, the pipes rerouted, and my wall had been patched smooth with fresh stucco. The backyard sounded like itself again. Wind in the trees. Distant traffic. Somebody grilling 2 houses over. Normal life. I sat outside that evening with a beer resting on the same patio my father helped build years ago, running my fingers along the warm clay tile while the quiet settled back into place around me. And I kept thinking about something Trevor said that night on the porch. "You care more about being right than being neighbors." Maybe some people watching this will think he had a point. Maybe you think I should have just tolerated the noise to keep the peace. But honestly, I think peace without respect is just surrender wearing a friendly face. And if somebody can drill into your home, shake your walls for weeks, ignore your objections, then call you difficult for standing up to them, that's not neighborly. That's entitlement. So now I'm curious. If you were in my position, would you have fought it all the way like I did? Or would you have let it go to avoid war with the neighbors? Let me know in the comments, because I guarantee this story's gonna split people right down the middle.